All right, pretend you didn't see that. Hello, everybody. So good to see you at Chase Oaks, whether you're here for first time or maybe you've been here a very long time and a regular part of the family, wherever you're at in your journey. We're super thankful that we're here together and that you're part of it. And you just heard your host at your campus talk about influencer. And let me give another little bit of oomph to that too. That's next Saturday. If you serve or lead or give regularly in this church, then please show up at Influencer next Saturday. And if you are new or not really engaged yet, it will also be a great thing to come to kind of find out what makes us us and what's going on. And so I hope to see you there next Saturday. So today we're starting a new series called Simplify. And Simplify is about making sure that we're living life in a way that we're not distracted by things that are most important, but we're actually build our lives around that which is most important. And simplify, the process of doing that may sound simple because, it's in the word, simplify, and that may make you think, well, then it sounds easy, but simplifying is not easy. Simple is not the same thing as easy. In fact, simplifying takes a lot of intentionality. It can take a lot of work. Like just think about decluttering or simplifying a house. I mean, I don't know if you've done that or if you're like me, need to do that, but you think, man, wow, that would be a lot. And I wasn't familiar with the Marie Kondo thing, and somebody told me about that. And so I started looking at the Marie Kondo stuff about decluttering and all that, having a simpler, home and all that. I think it looks great. So I'm not making fun of it or demeaning it when I say this, but when I looked at it, I thought, wow, that's a lot. I mean, it's simplifying, but that's not easy. There's consultants that you get and then all this stuff to buy, on their website to, you get new stuff to get rid of your old stuff and it's better and all that. I'm thinking, wow, that's a lot. And again, I'm sure it would be awesome. But today in this series, we're not talking about decluttering our house. We're talking about decluttering our lives, which is more significant. I know there can be related, but it is more significant and not easy. Because in our world, there's just so much, so many options, so many demands, so many distractions, so many things pulling at us that how do we even know if we're focusing on what's most important because of all the stuff pulling at us? Years ago, I think it was a little bit different. So my brother, 7 years older than me, he's in heaven now, and when he was little bitty, my dad was in grad school and my mom got a job working as a secret shopper for a private detective agency. So she would go in, which is a cool job because she could take my little brother and all you had to do was go shopping for a job. Wouldn't that be fun? Or go to a restaurant and then you would report on what you did. So that was great, except my brother was really smart. And that means when he was a preschooler, he was also really smart. And so as a preschooler, he kind of caught on. He figured out what they were doing and realized that, so now you have this little 3-year-old secret shopper, 4-year-old secret shopper, which are dangerous. And so for example, they went into Baskin-Robbins 31 flavors, one of the customers. So Baskin-Robbins ice cream, Baskin-Robbins 31 flavors. So he goes into the store and this was his pattern as a preschooler. He would just say, I can't read. Can you please tell me all the flavors? So then they'd roll their eyes, have to go through every flavor. Now the thing with that is my brother knew what he was gonna order because he always ordered the same thing. Can you guess what it was? Vanilla. He always ordered vanilla, which when I came along and got to know him, drove me nuts because vanilla is not a flavor. Vanilla is something you put flavor on top of, or you put flavor in, but vanilla is not a thing, right? Vanilla is just vanilla, but he always ordered vanilla. Now, Friday night I talked about that, and I asked, hey, how many people are like my brother, are vanilla people? And I was shocked how many vanilla people we have. How many vanilla people are in this service? Just raise your hand. That's a lot of people, and I'm sure Jesus loves you anyway, but it's glad you're here. But he always ordered vanilla. So then, they'd go through all the flavors, and then he would do his vanilla, right? And you can imagine the response after all that. And then he would look up at my mom and either say something like, I don't think he wanted to tell me all the flavors. He would report, he would tell on him, and so she had to change jobs and all that. But back then, 31 flavors, it was in the title of back then, Baskin Robbins 31 flavors, because it was so unique. Like at that time frame in our culture, it wasn't a high option culture. So to have a business that had 31 options was like, whoa, that's incredible. Nobody does that now. You don't put that in the title because it'd be like, big deal. So what, you got 30 something options? Of course you do. Everybody has lots of options. At that same time frame, you know how many television stations there were that were available, television networks? 4. And one of them was PBS, which doesn't really count. So it was like 3.5, 3.5 stations, and that's all you had to choose from. No streaming, all that stuff either. Just that was it, right? So it was a much more simple world. There weren't so many options. But now, of course, very different. And now we are in a world of so many options, so many distractions, so many demands, so many things pulling at us that every once in a while you kind of have to stop and wait a minute and think, wait, am I actually missing what's most important, busy, but missing what's most important, or am I actually capturing it? And today, that's what we're gonna kick off the Simplify series talking about as we talk about a principle. It's a Jesus principle, as we're gonna see, that he lived and taught, but it's the principle of the one thing. And whether you and I live the principle of the one thing, honestly, will in large part determine how effective we are in our life. Whether we let the most important things slip or whether we build our lives around that which is most important, and whether we capture the most important moment or opportunity in a moment or a season or miss it, we're gonna talk about the principle of the one thing. And this is one of those teachings of Jesus that whether you're a Christian or not, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's helpful. But for those of us who are Christians, it's really important because it's part of the living the way of Jesus. You and I cannot live the way of Jesus without living intentionally in the way that we're gonna look at today. So today we're gonna be in Luke chapter 10. If you follow along in the Bible, that's in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke. And it's a story that, now Jesus illustrates the principle, but here is where he teaches the principle of the one thing, and to a really good friend of his. And the story happens at a very busy time in his ministry, which was typical. Simplify isn't about not being busy. It's just about making sure we're building our busyness around that which is most important. So it's a busy time of Jesus' ministry. He's on his way to Jerusalem from another part of the country for a big Jewish celebration, one of their religious feasts that everybody was expected to show up at and come to. So Jerusalem was just gonna be crazy crowded. And on his way into Jerusalem, it became his pattern, he would stop in a town called Bethany. It was like a suburb. Sort of like as McKinney is to Dallas, Bethany still is, but Bethany is to Jerusalem. Now he's walking though, right? So it's a little bit bigger deal to have a place to stop before you go in. So he comes into Bethany at the home of people who were his friends and would become some of his closest replenishing relationships. One of the things that Jesus models when you think about what's important is he did make time for friends and replenishing relationships. But here's the story. As Jesus and his disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village, Bethany, where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. So you picture the scene, okay? Jesus is invited into this home. He comes into the home, and when you invite Jesus, you don't just get a +1. You get a plus many because he had disciples, he had followers, right? So that's why it says when Martha, the one sister, was preparing a big dinner, it's because there were a number of people that would have been with Jesus in that home. So Martha, just picture the scene, Martha's in the kitchen cooking dinner for all these people because somebody's got to do it, right? How are we going to feed these people? And her sister Mary is where, if you remember in the story, with Jesus in the living room, right? Just sitting there listening to what he's saying. And over time, Martha is getting more and more ticked off about that because she's in the kitchen, nobody's helping her, especially her sister Mary. Now, part of that would have been an expectation in that culture, that in that culture, Jesus didn't play by these rules, but in that culture, women did not sit at the feet of a rabbi like Jesus and be part of that teaching. Now, that was their culture. Jesus didn't play by those rules. He welcomed women into as his followers and right there. I mean, so he had a very different mentality about that. But in that culture, that would have been new for Martha, and that would have been part of it. But also, I mean, she would love to be out there too, but somebody's got to cook dinner, and Mary needs to get in here. And I could, as I imagine it, as she's getting more and more frustrated, the noise in the kitchen starts getting bigger and bigger. She starts clanging pans and trying to do everything. And then what is first muttering under her breath about nobody helping her gets louder and louder. And, if somebody would help me, this would be a lot easier, but nobody's getting the hint. And so frustrated, she comes out and interrupts. And it says in verse 40, she came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me." Now to her, that's obvious. Like, I'm the one doing all the work, and that's not fair, right? I mean, somebody's got to do it, and I can't do this by myself. It's not fair for me to do it by myself. But Lord, you tell her to, get her hiney into the kitchen with me, and because that's the way it should be. And I think she fully expected Jesus to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Martha, you're right. I didn't even think about it. I'm sorry. Mary, absolutely, you goober, get in there and help cook." But he doesn't. Instead, he says this, "But the Lord said to her," to Martha, "My dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. But there's only one thing." We're talking about the principle of the one thing. There's only one thing worth being concerned about in this moment. There's a time to be concerned about cooking, but in this moment, there's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. Now, there's a lot there, so let's start at the beginning. He starts out and he says, "My dear Martha." Now, when he says, "My dear Martha," it's very similar. I'm from Alabama. I'm from the South. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, no, you're in the South now. Texas is the South. Not really. It's kind of the South. It's like South and Southwest. Texas is its own country, like its own thing, right? And I'm proud to be part of it. But when I growing up, I was in the deep South. So when I think of the South, I think of Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia. Like, that's the South, right? And in the South, if you ever travel there, I'm just gonna give you a little tip, okay? Because people say, "Oh, the people in the South are so nice," and they are, but they're so sweet, they're so nice. And this is gonna happen to you if you spend any time there. At some point, somebody's gonna look at you and say, "Bless your heart." And you're gonna think, if you don't know any better, that is so sweet. These people are so nice. These Alabama people, like, oh, they wanna bless my heart. Bless you. That's not what they're saying. It's not what's happening. So "bless your heart," that sentiment, if you translated that into like New York City language, would be, "You're such an idiot." It means the same thing, okay? It's just like, it's a nice way to say you're an idiot. It's just like saying, "Oh, come on." And when he says, "My dear Martha," it's kind of like that. It's like, oh. In fact, in the original language of the New Testament, which is not English, it's Greek, and that'll become important later too. In the original language of the New Testament Greek, all he does is put her name, it's just her name twice. He doesn't say, "My dear Martha." He just says, "Martha, Martha." Now, has anybody ever said your name twice? It's usually not because you're so brilliant, right? And so like if you say to me, Jeff, you're like, "Oh yeah, I know, I'm such a goober. I'm such an idiot. What do you want to say? I'm sure it's something stupid I did." Right, Jeff. He says, "Martha, Martha." Meaning, I know you think you're on target, but you're off, and let me help you. And then he says, "You're worried and upset over all these details. But there's only one thing," in this principle of the one thing, "there's only one thing worth being concerned about in this moment. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her." That in this moment, yeah, okay, there's a time to cook, and that's important and all of that, but Mary has found something better. She's found the one thing that is by far the most important thing. And what is that? Well, she's got Jesus in her house. I mean, Jesus, it was a rabbi, that people like Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus, that we get into the story later, not today, but later, they have come to believe that he is the one prophesied in the Old Testament, the Messiah. It's probable they're even understanding, as Christians believe, that Jesus is who he claimed to be, which was not just a teacher, not just a wonderful person, but actually God who took on humanity and came here for us. And if you believe that, I mean, imagine, I know a lot of you believe that, some of you don't, but if you believe that, imagine if God was in your house. That's pretty big. Your creator is in your living room. And for Mary, it's like, I'm not gonna leave and go in the kitchen right now. I've got God in my living room. I'm gonna be right here. And after all, Jesus had already proven that he could handle food problems, like the feeding of the 5,000, if you know that story. He turned water into wine. He can handle run out of wine problems too. But right now, it's not that, there's a time to worry about fixing dinner, but right now is just not that time. And what Jesus is saying is, Martha, she's found it, and she's had this experience, and she's having this experience, and that will never be taken away from her. Meaning that experience that she's grabbed hold of, she found the one thing, it will help shape the rest of her life. It will always be with her. And the inference is, I hope you can realize it too. The principle of the one thing. Now, I really want to submit this in our thinking and our memory, and so I'm going to use a prop. I'm going to ask Liz to come back with a prop that I consider to be sort of a historic artifact, unfortunately. So, thank you, Liz. So for those who are listening to this on the podcast or something, this is one of those foam number 1 hands, and it has Alabama on the front. I bought this in 2009. And brought it out on the platform. That was the first Nick Saban era national championship. And I didn't want to be obnoxious. I felt like this is understated, right? It's not obnoxious. And I brought it out and still had it back there. And don't we all miss, it is nostalgic, don't we all miss the days when Alabama was playing for national championships? Don't we? I mean, like the game is tomorrow, and is anybody in the country even gonna watch? I mean, some team from Ohio. Where is Notre Dame even from? Where are they? And so, is that a community college? What is that? And one day, hopefully, everything will be restored and to the right way. I don't know. But will it help if I do this? Because really, I just want to talk about the one thing. It's not about being number one. It's just the principle of the one thing. Because in any given season, any given era, any given moment, any given day, it's thinking about what is the one thing. There are 100 things I'll do today, but what is the one thing that would rise to the top as the opportunity of the moment, as the one thing I don't want to miss? And I don't want to be so busy and pulled so many directions. I mean, I'm living intentionally. I want to be intentional enough to think about the one thing. The Apostle Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament, and who is like one of the key leaders, in the story of the New Testament, he talked about the one thing too, same phrase. In his case, in Philippians 3, he talks about the one thing as his one thing for his life, like his life purpose. That for him in Philippians 3, the one thing you might summarize in the book of Philippians is knowing Jesus and helping others come to know him. And for him, that was the one thing that drove every decision he made. It is helpful to have a life purpose, to have a sense of bigger picture that I'm committed to. What is that one thing for me? That's great. But then that informs all the littler one things, which is really my focus today, is in any given moment, what is the one thing? And Paul talks about that too, but he uses different phrase. And the phrase that Paul used to describe that in Ephesians 5, I just really love, and I think it helps cement the principle. And the phrase is redeeming the time. In Ephesians 5, he talks about redeeming the time. And redeeming the time is not just letting time go by, but making sure we're doing something with it, that we're buying it back, that we're redeeming it, that we're making it purposeful. Don't just let time go, but be intentional with time. Now, that by itself is a cool thought, redeeming the time. But when you understand it in the original language of the New Testament, Greek, and we're gonna geek out on Greek just a little bit, I've done that last week too, twice in a row. But so who knows? Maybe it's a trend. Probably not. But we're going to look at it because Greek is a more precise language than English. And so like time, there's multiple Greek words for time that he could have used. And I want to make sure we understand it because what he says is really cool once you understand it. And so there's two Greek words for time when he says redeem the time. One of them is the word chronos. CH is the way you do this, CHRONOS, chronos. We get chronology from it, right? A chronograph. Like my watch, this is a cheap chronograph, cheap watch, so you can hear it tick. Nice watches don't tick. They're quiet. But I can hear it tick, 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 tick. It's the ticking of time. So what Paul could have said, he didn't use this word, but he could have used the word chronos to say, man, make every second count. Make every minute count. Make every hour count. And that'd be a cool concept, but that's not what he's saying. It's not what he uses. Instead, he uses another word, which is, I think, way cooler as a thought, and that is kairos. He says, redeem the kairos. Don't miss the kairos. Kairos is not the ticking of time, not the chronology of time, not the linear boom, boom, boom of time. Kairos is a Greek concept. It's the opportunity embedded in time. The thought that is that every moment, every minute, every second, every hour has a kairos attached to it, an opportunity attached to it. And therefore, don't miss the opportunity because once it's gone, it's gone. They even, in Greek culture, this is a painting of kairos. This is how in sculpture and painting he was represented. They anthropomorphize the concept. And here's kairos. And kairos, you notice this guy has wings on his back, even wings on back of his feet, on his Achilles. And because the idea is that kairos comes in a moment, lands like a butterfly or something, lands, but doesn't stay there very long. It just lands, lights for just a second, and then it's gone. And if you grab it, you've got it. If you miss it, you've missed it forever. It comes and it goes. Notice, guy has a unique balding pattern and hairstyle, and he's got the lock of hair coming out of the top, and that was typical depictions of him. He had this lock of hair, and the idea was that's what you would grab. You would grab Kairos's lock of hair if you were smart, because the idea is the opportunity of the moment just is there for just a tiny bit, and if you miss it, you've missed it forever. If you grab it, you've got it. It's what Jesus was talking about with Mary when he said, man, she understood the kairos. She understood the one thing in the moment, and she grabbed it, and therefore it'll never be taken away from her. But Martha was missing it. That's the principle of the one thing. It's living life with a mentality, with an intentionality that says, hey, there's a lot of things that are important, but is there one thing that rises to the top when it comes to this period of time? So let's play with that a little bit. Play with the principle to think about, well, how would we live that way and not miss things, but grab hold of things? So you can think about the principle of the one thing or the most important thing, the kairos moment, when you think about a day. Like what if we lived each day, and I've started to do this, starting the day just saying, there's a lot that's gonna happen today. There'll be 500 things that happen today. But what is the one thing that's most important? Like, so for me, I've started to do this in the morning where, I used to not drink coffee, but since we opened up Local Good, you've heard me talk about coffee, it's a new thing. And so now, like I had coffee this morning, which is crazy to me. My whole life I haven't done it, but now, and now it's like my body and mind are like, where's the coffee? Like that's already happening to me. I think I'm already getting addicted to this thing. But when I'm drinking my coffee or you're drinking whatever you drink first thing in the morning, just ask the question, hey, what one thing? There's a lot of things I'll do today, but what is one thing? What one opportunity of today is maybe most important for me to begin to think about, pray about, make sure I don't miss, make sure I'm like focused a little bit around that. And sometimes I know that one thing and sometimes I really don't. And so I'm like, okay, God, help me be as I start today. I'm just gonna be on the lookout, like eyes open. What's the one thing? God, what are you trying to do? It's been helpful. You can also think about that. You can break down a day, like each segment of a day. Like, so if you are a student and you're going to school, hey, there's a lot of things I'll do in school today, but today, what is maybe the one thing that's most important? Maybe it's a particular conversation, a particular task, I don't know what, something to learn. I don't know what it is, but what is the one thing that would rise to the top? Or if you go to work, what is the one thing as I go into work today? I'll do lots of things, but what one thing is the opportunity of the moment? And to be thinking about that, to be prepared for that. You can even break down a segment. Well, it's also like when you go home too, not just when you're at work or school, but hey, what's most important is I go home. A friend of mine used to, he had a very busy job. He was head of a ER unit as a doctor, and it was just crazy all the time. And so he would just pull over before he went into his house with his kids and wife and all that, just to say, okay, God, help me rethink this a little bit and think, what does it mean now to serve my family and to be present in the right way and all that. And so in that, whatever you go to, whether you're single or married or kids or whatever, so that's something to think about, a segment of a day. You can break it down even further than that, like to each moment, like each conversation, each meeting, each thing that you do as you think through the day. That's been really helpful for me, and I've just been doing it a very short time because of this message. But now when I go, I have a lot of meetings in my life. And so when I go into meetings now, I just ask the question, okay, God, what is the one thing that's most important in this meeting? Not just to go into a meeting and say, okay, how long is this gonna last and when can we get out of here? But to think, okay, what is the one thing that's most important? And specifically, God, what one thing is most important from me that's needed in this meeting? And that's been super helpful to have that idea and have that focus. So for example, sometimes as a leader, what's most needed for me in a particular meeting might be to make a decision or get input and provide clarity so that we're walking out with a decision, that we're walking out with clarity. But sometimes it's not that at all. Sometimes it's the opposite of that. It's not about me making a decision, but me empowering somebody else to make a decision, because it's actually their decision to make. I need to empower them and just say, hey, what do you need from me to help you decide that? Because you're the best person to make that decision. It's your responsibility and you have the expertise. What do you think and what do you need from me? Well, that helps me. Or sometimes it's not that at all. Sometimes what they need is for me to listen and to communicate, hey, I value you, I care about you. I wanna know what you think. I wanna know what you're struggling with. And just to listen, which is not easy always. And my wife would say, yeah, listen, that's a good word. Listen, like, when we're together or whatever, listen's not a bad idea. Sometimes it's to encourage, but it just helps me to be intentional in a given moment. You can think about this as well as a season, like each season. Every season has certain one thing opportunities, big things that are most important, that are not true of other seasons. So sometimes it's just you're in a season in your work life where it is going to be intense. Maybe you're starting a company or starting a project or you're in a crisis, and it's gonna take a lot out of you. And in that season, being focused on that is really important. Other times in your career, you have a little bit of a break and take advantage of that so that you can focus on other things. Maybe it's a season of learning, of change or whatever, but to think, okay, in this season in my career, what is it? You can also think about seasons in terms of family life. If you're single, see that as a season. You may be like Jesus and extend that season for a long time, but regardless, see it as a season. Hey, in this season of singleness or this season where maybe I'm married and don't have kids, that's unique. Don't miss that one. What is the opportunity that we don't want to miss? If you're an empty nester like me, what is the opportunity you want to miss? If you have little kids at home, it is what is the one thing that's most important? And for those of you who have young kids at home, and you're in that stage where you're parents with young kids, you can probably smell where I'm going here, that I'm gonna say, I know it's busy, I know it's a lot, I know it's overwhelming, I know you just wanna sleep one day, and that would be the one thing that would be most important, a nap or whatever, and that is important. But you're gonna expect me to say, hey, that time is so fleeting, don't miss it. The opportunity to connect to your children in this phase where they think you're amazing and a genius, don't miss it. And that's true, I am gonna say that. Because there was a time where I blew it. Christy corrected me and changed things where I was missing that, so busy in what I'm doing, job-wise, ministry-wise, that I was missing that. And I'm so glad I made the changes I made. And I remember in that process, I was one night, it's just a vivid memory, I was putting one of my sons to bed, Caleb, my youngest son. And I said, hey, choose any book you want. Now, it had been a really busy day. I've been traveling a lot, and I just wanted to, rest and connect with Christy, and so I was trying to kind of rush it, putting him to bed. So I said, hey, pick out a book, hoping he would pick out a little book, short book. But he picked out a long book. Now he's like 3. And long meant probably 15 pages, okay? Not like War and Peace or something. So we're reading through it, and I'm reading through it quick, rushing through it, and he can tell. And so he stopped me, and he said, Dad, it's okay. You don't have to read the whole book. I don't need all the pages. I can just go to bed. And it was like, right? You just feel the knife, right? You big dummy. It's just like God saying, Jeff, bless your heart, Right, I was missing it. The opportunity to connect to the heart of a child in that tender age and that tender moment. Because if I would pay a lot of money to be able to go back to that one night and hang with my 3-year-old Caleb, right? I have that perspective now. And fortunately, I did correct in that moment too, to say, Caleb, I'm so sorry. Let's start over, and we can read other books too. But it's just so easy as we rush through life to not realize what we miss if we're not intentional, if we don't think about it, if we're not careful. That's the point of this. So that's enough illustrations, I think. Get the idea, right? Of just living life in a way where we say often, okay, what is the one thing that is rising to the top? I don't want to be the Martha that misses it. I want to be the Mary that seizes it in a way that I'll have it forever. This will mark me and all that. And so let's practice this week. Like today's Sunday. For those who are in the room right now, you may be listening and it's not Sunday, but for those of us who are Sunday, this afternoon is an opportunity, right? And just to think about, hey, what one thing is most important this afternoon? Don't just let time go by. Like, what is the one thing that's most important? If you're a Buffalo fan, it may be one answer. If you're not, whatever. But what is the one thing that rises to the top today? That's a great question to ask, right? Or you may not even know. You may just say, God, help me be open to it, just to have my eyes open. And then why not? Let's start each day this week and just practice that. And just think through our day at the beginning and think, God, what is the one thing that maybe demands most of my focus today? Or I really want to pray right now about, like, what is the one thing that is maybe most important today? And for those of us who are, and you can do this in a moment, but let's just practice it that way. And as I said a while back, for those who are, maybe you're not a Christian, and then, okay, just think about what's most important to you and what do you want? And that's incredibly valuable. For those of us who are Christians, it's a little different because for us, it's an opportunity not just to think about what do I want, but it's actually a surrender exercise, and that's what we're about to do. We're about to go to God in prayer to say, God, what do you want? Like, I know I could say, well, this is what I think, but I don't want to live my life that way. I want to elevate that to say, God, what do you want? Like, what's most important to you in my day today? What's most important to you this afternoon on a Sunday afternoon? God, what would rise to the top? And God, would you kind of speak into my heart to give me that insight and wisdom? And so let's bow our heads together now. And I'm going to encourage you, as I always say, or often say, as we go to prayer, prayer is just talking with God. He's your Father. He loves you. You don't have to use some kind of special words. You don't need somebody else to do it for you. He loves you. Just talk to him. And maybe just ask him the question, God, right now, in this season of my life, what is most important? What is the one thing from your perspective that, because you want what's best for me, what is the one thing that would rise to the top? Just speak into my life and heart right now. And maybe as you think about this afternoon, ask the same question. God, even in one afternoon, God, what is maybe the one thing that would rise to the top? As you think about this week, Same thing, same discipline, the discipline of the one thing. God, as I think about this week in front of me, what is maybe the one thing that would be the most important that I sure don't want to miss? I'm gonna do 1,000 things, but what is the one thing? Father, thank you that you really want our lives to be rich and full and joyful and connected. And part of that is just being intentional about how we live our life and not letting opportunity go, but seizing it and being intentional in the way we live our life and our time. And so God, would you help us live this way? To be more like Mary and understanding the one thing that's most important in a moment and not miss it. In Jesus' name, we pray that. Amen. So I talked about